I'm Luke Story. For the past 22 years, I've been relentlessly committed to my deepest passion, designing the ultimate lifestyle based on the most powerful principles of spirituality, health, psychology, and personal development. The Lifestylist Podcast is a show dedicated to sharing my discoveries and the experts behind them with you. All right, Morley Robbins, here we go, man. It's been a long time coming. I'm so happy to have you on the show.
Delighted to be here, Luke.
This is going to be fun. I'm like rubbing my hands together here, like, I finally get to talk to someone who understands some of these issues that, frankly, I've been kind of trying to trickle down to listeners of this show and people that follow me on social media, because I think after all these years of research, you've really created a model that's very useful. And my goal here today is to sort of take the complexity out of it if we can, because it's very complex, and just give people actionable steps. But before we do that, I want to ask you something that I have for every other podcast asked the guest at the end, but I just thought of it today and I thought I'm going to ask at the beginning. So I'll start with this question. Who have been three teachers or teachings in general that have influenced your life or your work that you could share with us?
Oh my God. Wow. Beautiful question. Only three.
Yeah, I know. It's tough. It's tough to narrow it down.
I would say that the scientist that has impressed me the most is Albert Szent-Györgyi. And people certainly know of him because of his involvement with vitamin C. But he was absolutely just a legendary thinker. And people don't know about the internecine warfare that was taking place in science back in the 1920s. But there was a guy named Heinrich Wieland fighting with a guy named Otto Warburg. And they were trying to gain supremacy about what was more important, hydrogen or oxygen, to make the mitochondria work. And you got to picture these big titans. These guys were huge in their fields at the time. And here was this lowly little Albert Szent-Györgyi who was just brilliant. He said, well, actually, you're both right. And he published this article in 1925 that just totally synthesized everything. It was just amazing. So I think he's just such a fresh and creative thinker. Very, very powerful. Probably the teachers that they really influenced me a lot, tremendous minds. One would be Leslie Clave. He's a copper researcher, still alive. He's retired, but he's still alive. And he is just legend. He can say more in 4 sentences than most people can say in 4 paragraphs. He just has this incredible capacity to distill it down. So you're like, oh, wow, now I get it. And then I'd say the third teacher of just tremendous influence would be a contemporary. He's a professor at University of Florida in Gainesville, and his name is Jamie Collins. And he's just this brilliant scientist who he actually speaks 3 languages. He can speak magnesium, copper, and iron.
Okay.
And his son is just matriculated at UNC Dental School. And so we had a chance to host Forrest, his son, and then Jamie and his wife, Renee, and had this lovely dinner. And it was just such a peak experience to be there with him. And we started geeking out. And they said, come on back, guys, But he's just a phenomenal thinker. But he's such a catalytic agent in getting people to understand what's going on.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing those, and we'll put them in the show notes. I was only vaguely familiar with the first one, so we'll track some links down and share those with the audience. So I first, I think, heard you on Extreme Health Radio, which might have been the first podcast that I started listening to on a regular basis, and then furthermore down the road a bit on MitoLife Radio. And I feel like, and I was just listening to one you did with Joe Mercola today. I've probably listened to, I want to say like 30 interviews or something that you've done. And I think I'm just starting to get my head around it. But maybe before we dive into that, you could just share briefly your journey. I understand you at one point found yourself with a frozen shoulder and then went to see someone who does network spinal analysis. And that kind of opened your eyes to there being more than meets the eye when it comes to health and just the gross physical realm. And that caught my eye because Donnie Epstein was a guest on this show maybe 3 years ago,
Oh,
and
oh my God.
yeah, and
Okay.
before the interview, he worked his magic on me, and I could barely talk. So it also had a profound effect on me in a different way. But maybe just how did you get to the point where you're spending hours and hours a day for 10 plus years just combing over scientific research?
It's fascinating. I grew up in a very sickly family. My mom was an alcoholic and had all sorts of heart issues. My dad was manic depressive with schizophrenic tendencies. Um, and so you grow up going to the hospital a lot. You're kind of drawn to that field. My sister became a nurse, and so I was supposed to become the doctor, right? And I get to college, and it's like, oh wow, there's a lot of work involved. I don't think that's really going to be my future. So I did what when you don't get into medical school, you go to business school because you can boss the doctors around. And that's exactly what I did. Um, got my business degree, worked in hospitals for about 12 years, and then wanted to take it up a notch. So I decided to become a consultant and spent 20 years flying in those aluminum tubes. And you can't have a more stressful life, I don't think. Racing, you get flights and, just everything that goes around it. But part of it was pulling a suitcase behind my back. So for 20 years, I'm pulling a suitcase. And my body said, we're done with that. And I got a frozen shoulder, couldn't pick my hand up above my waist. So I went to a health food store and explained what my dilemma was. And they said, well, you need to go see Dr. Liz. And I went, I don't do witchcraft. So, because I knew that was a chiropractor. I was
Yeah.
like,
Okay.
no, I don't know. And so they sold me some supplements and they didn't do anything. So I couldn't sleep. I literally couldn't pick my hand above my waist. And I was in so much pain. So I went back after a couple of months. I said, look, you must have something stronger. And the owner looked me in the eye. She says, Morley, we love you. Go see Dr. Liz. So with my tail between my legs, I go see Dr. Liz, who was trained by Donnie Epstein. And her treatment room in Evanston, a large room, maybe about double your room that you're in right now. She had 9 tables in there. So she would treat a flight of clients would come in about every hour, nine clients. And it was a network of clients healing each other. I was like so out of my league. I was like, what am I doing here? And in 2 sessions, I had complete, I could, it was the most transformational experience of my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she used a phrase though that was really what you want to get to the essence of how did you get into this? And she started talking about the innate healer. And I thought to myself, I didn't say anything to her. I thought, if there's an innate healer, if there's some mechanism in our body that can heal ourselves, why do we have millions of doctors around the world? I couldn't make sense of that. And I decided right then and there, I was going to figure out who is this innate healer. Long story short, it's bioavailable copper. And it's an amazing substance, which I'm sure we'll discuss. But we live on a planet that have 2 really toxic elements, oxygen and iron. And they don't play nice together. And copper is what keeps them at bay, keeps them under regulation, harnesses them to do what they're supposed to do. And it's the most overlooked, misunderstood facet of human physiology. And it just, for some reason, I was drawn to it. Maybe I was copper in a former life. I don't know. But it was just, I'm just like I'm obsessed with it almost. Because to me, it's like it's the sine qua non. It's like if you don't understand the role of copper, then you don't understand the body. And I just find it a fascinating subject.
Yeah, thanks for retelling that story. I've had similar experiences with the network spinal analysis. It brought me back to a clinic I used to go to back in Beverly Hills, and yeah, there'd be a room full of people. And at that time, I remember being just really emotionally stressed. I was going through a really difficult period with a business situation and whatnot, and I wasn't even in any particular pain. I just would go in there to get a break from my mind because it was like it was the only thing that would drop me into that, that nice theta state where,
Sure.
the mind's awake, but the body's asleep. It's just one of my favorite places to go to. And I would go in there and reliably get that effect. So yeah, that's cool. Um, so,
Doctor's now my wife, by the way.
oh, no way. Are you serious?
Yeah, yeah.
You lucky devil. So you get to get that whenever you want.
It was a transformational experience. It was
Oh
really
my god.
mhm,
That's so cool. Well,
yeah,
you've created this whole model, the root cause protocol, right? And you have all of these practitioners that you've trained under your system. They're out there helping all these people. Like I said, I've delved deeply into the mass amount of content you've put out, and that's not even stuff on your website. I mean, there's just I don't know, probably a couple hundred hours of stuff just on there outside of your training. So I don't even know what's in there. But one thing that I find challenging a little bit for myself, and I'm sure those listening maybe too, is that you have these different kind of thought leaders in the alternative health space, like a Jack Cruz or a Ray Peat, different
yeah,
people like that are very confident in their model, and their model has helped people. And then it's almost as if, and I don't think the leaders do this themselves, but it's almost like these cults form around these belief systems, and you
right,
have these people with silos of information and silos of beliefs, and unfortunately, many of them are not that malleable from my observation. But
right.
I think it's perhaps confusing to some people because the people that are out there that are leaders are typically citing studies, and so my question is, can you find a study to kind of support any point of view at this point in health? Because you have fish
Mhm.
oil advocates that can give you, X number of studies saying how great it is for you, and then an equal number of people on the other side saying polyunsaturated fats are going to be the death of you. So, how do you reconcile, I guess, your model in consideration of the other models out there that seem to have some validity and large swaths of people following them?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. Um, to your question, yes, you can find a study for any position. Absolutely. It, that's what makes it so frustrating. You'd think that there's kind of like a right, wrong, left, right. No, it's just it's like it's anything goes. And there's a famous meeting that David Kessler, who is a former head of the FDA, where they were debating whether to ban access to supplements and this and that, and it was getting so confusing. And according to the legend, it wasn't there, so I don't know, but this is what how it was reported. Dr. Kessler said, "That's exactly what we want. We want it to be so confusing that people don't know what to do." And I think did he actually say that? We don't know. It certainly seems like he did, because that's kind of the world that we're in. Um, the thing is, I guess the way I've allowed it to evolve is it made sense to me that everything hinged around energy, making energy. And when I began to understand that you can't make energy unless you activate oxygen and turn it into water, and that there's only one enzyme that does that, there's only one mineral that allows that one enzyme to do it, that became this really galvanizing point of understanding that I think the I think the world and our physiology is a lot clearer and a lot more simple than people realize. And there's all this foment about this concept and this paradigm. And when you begin to really harness yourself to energy, it's amazing how things get simplified. And I mean, there was real, I know you understand this, but there was method to my madness to call the book Cure Your Fatigue. Because the starting point for every condition is lack of energy. I mean, even something as basic as um, plaque in arteries. It's the endothelial cells that stop making energy, that start to recruit macrophages. And it's like it all starts with the lack of energy. Well, how did the energy start to wobble? Because iron started to build up in the mitochondria. And it's like when you begin to understand those concepts, then you begin to see, oh my gosh, this happens, doesn't matter where it is in the body. And I mean, I have tremendous respect for what Jack Cruz has done around light, around just the whole earthing process, the flow of electrons, and what have you. But again, I don't know if he really enjoys talking about minerals. That's just not. I don't think that's his area of strength or area of interest. You know, Ray Peat. There's no one who's more knowledgeable about hormones and estrogen than Ray Peat. I'm like, I have a torturous love-hate relationship with Ray Peat's writings because he's brilliant, absolutely brilliant in some areas. And I'm like, 4,500 calories of sugar? Wait a minute. I'm not sure I'm with you on that one. So, but again, what I want the listeners to understand is it was Ray Peat who inspired me to do this. I was reading his article on iron toxicity. And towards the end of that article, it's an amazing article if people haven't read it. And he talks about this point. He says, he talks about ceruloplasmin. He said, but to my knowledge, no one's ever developed a recipe to increase its production. And I read that sentence, Luke, and I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make that recipe, and that's what the root cause protocol is. It started with that article, and I was talking to my oldest son, he's an engineer, electrical engineer. He said, Dad, what I think you need is stops and starts. I'm like, brilliant. I like that. And that's where that idea came from. And so it was 2 stops, 2 starts. And now it's about 12 stops and 15 starts, but we're trying to keep
Yeah.
keep it at bay. I mean, we could easily make it 100 things, right? I'm sure
Yeah.
you and I really got into the weeds. We could identify 100 things we have to do, and then we would lose everyone.
Yeah.
So the whole idea is to give people the critical mass. But I think what's important is I'm not trying to refute or dispute what these other luminaries are saying. If anything, I'm trying to be this engine oil to try to say, how can we make all this stuff work together? But it's to me, um, I'm really, I'm so over enemies, the pathogens, the toxins, the this and that. It's like that's where all the optics are, but that's not where the healing takes place. Healing takes place with energy. So I say, ignore the enemies, let's ignite the energy. And that's really, to me, that has such, um, it's a very simple message, but it has enormous implications.
Yeah, thank you for illuminating that. It reminds me of something I heard when I first got into my own healing journey back in, God, I probably heard this in the mid or late 90s. It's so simple, but then the answer to the equation can get complex. And it was something to the effect of, if you're sick, stop giving your body the things that made it sick and start giving it the things that enable it to heal itself,
Right.
which is undisputably, and I would agree with you, energy, right? So it's like, if I'm putting things in and on my body that take away from my metabolic energy, then I can incrementally start to avoid them and remove them from my lives. But the harder piece there is, I think, what are the things that my body wants and needs in order to really
Right.
thrive? And they have to be based in giving it the ability to create energy, because right, that's where our immune system, detoxing, all of the things that people are kind of niche down into are fundamentally, as you said, issues of energy. So I really appreciate that perspective, and it's probably why I've just continually gone back to your work. Wonder what Morley says about this, wonder what he says about that. And that really is the crux of it. So maybe that's a good setup for us to give a bit of an elevator pitch on the root cause protocol. If we're not chasing symptoms, kind of in the allopathic or functional medicine model, then what is perhaps the root cause of some of the symptoms that many of us are experiencing, as you've outlined it in your training and how you work with people.
Yeah. And let me, by way of introduction, and I appreciate the setup. I want to make most people don't know what copper is, or if they do know, they know it's toxic and to stay away from it. Like, well, maybe there's more to the story, and always appreciate opportunities like this to really begin to paint a much different picture. But there's only four things that copper does that I think are worth talking about. Only four things. Copper creates energy. Copper clears exhaust. Copper catalyzes enzymes, especially enzymes that involve oxygen, which is a big deal. And copper combats enemies. There's not one pathogen that doesn't cave in the presence of copper. Bacteria, fungus, virus, and parasites all cave in the presence of copper. But other than those four things, Luke, copper doesn't do much. It's like, that's it. That's the whole kit and caboodle. And yet, it's not taught that way in doctor school. It's not taught that way in nutrition school. Alternative healers, oh my gosh, they don't think of it in that sense. So the whole notion behind the root cause protocol was, I think it's important for people to know how the journey evolved. And so I started with this fixation of magnesium because I actually was Dr. Liz's girl Friday. I totally checked out. I had to, I just couldn't go back to the world of hospitals. I had to do something very different. And I was reading, and I was uh, started to write. And this one article, what I was meeting with one of her clients, and she said, "Well, I think what you need to do is write with paradoxical intention." I said, "What?" And she said, "Reverse psychology." I went, "Oh, okay." And so I had a whole series of articles. One was "Let's Get Fat." It was a 10-step plan. You know, let's break bones. Let's figure out how we're going to create osteoporosis. And one of them was, let's make our heart attack. No, don't wait for it to happen. Let's go on the offense, right? And so in each of these, it was a 10-step plan, but I was using the research of the conventional industry against itself. And so in this particular article, 10-step plan, 7 of the 10 steps came from the American Heart Association. It was very comical. It was like, if you don't want to have a heart attack, don't go to the American Heart Association website. But I was meeting with another practitioner, and I said, I'd asked her to read this article about let's make a heart attack. She said, it's really clever. So it's very good. She said, but I can't help but think that step number 8 isn't more important than you think. Step number 8 was stop all of your magnesium. And so I thought, maybe she's right. So I I settled on Carolyn Dean's Magnesium Miracle. And Luke, I read that like it was a murder mystery. Because suddenly I knew why everyone was in the hospital. And so I was like totally smitten with magnesium, and you just need more magnesium. And I remember a practitioner pulled me aside and said, Morley, if it was that simple, we would have figured it out. And I was like, well, maybe you don't understand it the way I do. And I was totally wrong. He was totally right. And so magnesium got me to begin to scratch the surface. And I discovered that there's such a thing called stress. And then what's the greatest stress on the planet? Oxidative stress. I didn't know that. And then I was reading this article by an Italian researcher. And he said, well, the greatest stress on planet Earth is iron stress. And it was like this anvil had fallen on my head. I went, oh my God, iron. I've never thought about iron. And then iron got me to copper, and copper got me to ceruloplasmin. And what the root cause protocol is really about is let's optimize the production of this protein that's the master antioxidant in our body. And when people think antioxidants, think, oh, ascorbic acid, or maybe they'll think vitamin E or something like that. It's like, those are little Tonka toys ceruloplasmin, it's one of the largest proteins in the body. And it's 1,066 amino acids. It's got 8 copper atoms inside it. I mean, it's just like, if anyone's ever seen the movie Fury, the tank movie Fury with Brad Pitt, there's 5 soldiers in that. And there's a little trap door at the bottom of the tank. There's a trap door in ceruloplasmin. It's absolutely amazing. But the model for conventional medicine is one gene, one protein, one function. And that's what drives big pharma: gene, protein, function. There's one ceruloplasmin gene, or there's one, ceruloplasmin gene. There's one protein, but it's a transformer, and it can do 20 different things. And it drives big pharma crazy.
Hmm.
You want a skateboard? I can do skateboard. Oh, you'd rather have a bike? Yeah, we'll do bike. Oh, you want a motorbike? Yeah, I've got motorbike. Oh, you want a big Harley tricycle? Okay, I can do that too. You want a car? No, you'd rather have a sports car. Oh no, what you really want is a rocket? I've got all of that and more. And it's like, it's Luke, it's absolutely mind-bending to realize what it can do. And it transforms itself depending upon the condition.
Well, that's interesting that you use the analogy of an anvil falling on your head because anvils, I'm pretty sure, are made of iron.
Exactly.
you
Oh,
know,
and
boom.
that's why they had this epiphany. And the whole point of the protocol is to help people get the nutrients in their body so their body can make more of this protein and get the body to heal itself. And
with this
that's
with
the heal.
this ceruloplasmin, right? Okay, got it. Tell us the story of how iron farming equipment and iron fortified foods led us into this situation of iron overload and dysregulation. I've heard you talk about that, and I thought that was fascinating.
Oh, it's absolutely amazing. There was actually Victor Show Victor
Schauberger?
Schauberger. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. Victor Schauberger actually developed what was called the golden plow, and it was made of brass, but he called it a golden plow. But the yield that this thing put out was incredible, and that was very threatening to the system. And so, the, allegedly, and I think there's enough evidence that this actually happened. There was a letter campaign to farmers throughout Europe saying, "Hey, you're going to kill the futures market if you start to adopt this golden plow," and they stopped like that and adopted a steel plow made of iron. So the thing is, when you've got copper going through the soil, you're energizing the soil. If you use brass tools, farming tools, plows and shovels and rakes, and when they're made of brass, you're actually energizing the soil. When they're made of steel, no, just the opposite. And the steel discs and all these different implements that farmers use have really restricted the yield. And this is all taking place in the 20s and 30s. And then there was some very um, important research done by two biochemists, McCants and Widdowson. Well, they were from England, and they were the quintessential scientists of their day, studying nutrition and studying the importance of different minerals. And they were really focusing on iron and the fact that there was iron deficiency. And somehow their pristine research became the basis of deciding to fortify food with iron. And this really happened in the dead of night. It was actually in 1941, in the thick of the Second World War. And it happened in the UK, in Canada, and the US initially. And this was written up in a book by Jim Moon. Jim is spelled Jym, but it's called Iron the most toxic metal. And that book was published in, I think, 2007 or 2008. I've only read it 5 times. That's how important the book is. But he makes meticulous record of what happened to iron. And they started to fortify wheat flour with iron. And the justification for it is, it's actually pretty comical. At any given time in society, 1% of society is pregnant, 99% not so much. And there's something called hemodilution that takes place during the 40 weeks of pregnancy. And that during the first half of the pregnancy, the woman's hemoglobin level will be about where it is when she's not pregnant. And then in the second half of the pregnancy, it starts to drop off. Blood volume is rising, but hemoglobin is not. And what's also happening is hemoglobin is moving from mother to the fetus. It's a really important thing that needs to take place. And the reason, it's very simple. The mother's body is trying to get rid of the iron so she can make milk to feed the baby. And this is very well chronicled, that there's this drop in hemoglobin. Well, the scientists studying this turned it into a disease, and they called it anemia. And it's called anemia of pregnancy. And then what they decided to do was not just inoculate the pregnant women, but inoculate the 99%. Because they assumed, well, if the pregnant women have anemia, then everyone has anemia. And so we need to fortify everyone with iron. Okay?
Oh, God.
No, seriously.
Oh, man.
No, it's unreal. You can't even imagine that they would even think that way, but they did. And so 41 comes along, they start adding iron filings. And then in 1969, Food and Drug Administration decides they're going to increase the amount of iron. These are, I think people listening would say, well, yeah, it's organic iron, so of course it's okay. No, we're talking about iron filings, literally filings, folks. It's not organic iron. And so they're going to increase it 300%. And 27 scientists from around the world flew to Washington and said, what are you trying to do? Kill people? And that's pretty much what they were trying to do. So in a magnanimous gesture, the FDA only increased it 50%. So I'm sure people in your listening community and your followers, I'm sure they've run across videos where people have crushed up cereal, put it in the milk, and then used a magnet to pick up the cereal, right? It's like, it's right there. They're not hiding it. Well, what people need to know is that the most effective way to kill energy production in the mitochondria is to bring in too much iron. And there are studies that will look at a 40% loss, 60% loss, 80% loss, and 96% loss of energy production, depending upon how much iron is being allowed into the mitochondria. And what people don't know, I'm not expecting them to know, but what they don't know is that copper is in charge of recycling iron. And that's not taught anywhere. And so if iron's not being recycled, it builds up inside the mitochondria, and then the energy production just zaps down. And that's where most of the world is now, because iron fortification is global now. You think of it's not just 3 countries; it's most of
Wow.
the world, because we feed most of the world, right? Think of the programs that we've got, and it's a massive issue that is very carefully guarded, and people don't think about that iron fortification. They don't think about the amount of sugar we have in our diet. And I've got a new phrase now that sugar is white iron. And the relationship between sugar metabolism and iron metabolism is almost identical. And folks like Robert Lustig talk about this very eloquently in his book, Metabolically. People should read that. You'll curb your sugar intake, I guarantee you. And
That
I think what's
that iron piece, Morley, just for a second, is so interesting because when you first started to tell the story about the first implementation of this, I thought, well, that was just perhaps gross incompetence. But then in 1969, when you had
no,
all of these, established, well-educated professionals, doctors coming forth saying, "Hey, this is a bad idea," then it leads me into, wow, this is actually more nefarious than I even thought. And I'm a bit of a conspiracy analyst, not a theorist. But I find it shocking that more people aren't aware of this when now there's at least an emerging subculture of people who are aware of a program like the fluoridation of water. Like
mhm,
many people now understand that that's not done for our health, to say the least, and that it has extremely deleterious effects on the entire population wherever they do that. But this iron thing, I think many people listening still probably think, well, iron's good for you. I went to the doctor and I did a blood test and they told me I needed more iron. So now I'm taking, this iron tablet. It's just crazy.
no, the meme on the planet is you're anemic and you're copper toxic. And the truth is just the opposite. People don't realize that, again, in the world of TCM, copper is the general and iron is the foot soldier. Just so people have a sense of orders of magnitude, the amount of copper it takes to run our body is 100 milligrams of copper. And that fits on the head of a 1-inch stick pen. It's a little tiny bit of copper. And we're supposed to have about 5,000 milligrams of iron. Now, I'm going to be 70 in a couple months. So I'll tell you how much iron I've got in my body. Um, I have a modest, I'm not sure you can see it, 25,000 milligrams of iron. And it's not my theory. These are the leading iron biologists on the planet. Robert Crichton, Douglas Kell, Gutteridge and Hallowell, E.D. Weinberg. These are luminaries in the world of iron biology. And we accumulate 1 milligram of iron every day we're on the planet.
Every
So
day, one
every
milligram?
day, every day.
Whoa.
So you're what, 51? Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
51. 51 times 365. So you have a whopping 18,000.
Come on.
And you're supposed to have 5.
Oh, man.
And so people don't realize that this iron is in their tissue and it's not showing up in their blood. And that tissue and blood are different media, as you know. But it was actually Bruce Ames, who was one of the greatest scientific minds on the planet. He was at Berkeley for many years, and he wrote an article in 2004 where he was studying this dynamic of iron in the tissue versus iron in the blood. 10 times more iron in the tissue than shows up in the blood. And doctors, God love them, they're doing their job. They're doing the best that they've been trained to do. They've been only trained to interpret iron in the blood, and they're blind to iron in the tissue. Well, then we're back to copper, because it's copper that recycles iron out of the tissue back into the blood. And it's a system called the reticuloendothelial system. It's a big fancy word. It took me 2 years to figure out that meant recycling. But oh, okay, that's simple. Let's talk about recycling. And here's the fascinating part. You and I have been talking for 45 minutes. Uh, times 60 minutes, right? So that's 2,700 minutes times 60 seconds. That's 162,000 seconds you and I have been talking.
Time
And
flies
we,
when you're having fun.
no, I know. But every second of every day, Luke, we need to replace 2.5 million red blood cells. So 162,000 times 2.5 million is a big number. And it turns out it's 200 billion every 24 hours. We've got to turn over 1% of our red blood cells every 24 hours. 2.5 million a second. And nobody's thinking about that. But here's the mind-blowing statistic. You're sitting down, right?
Yep, very much so.
Okay. Hopefully your listeners are too.
If you're driving, this might be a good time to take a pause and get ready.
Yeah. Pull over, put the emergency brake on.
Yeah.
It only takes 25 milligrams of iron to replace 200 billion red blood cells. 25 milligrams. Now here's the catch. 24 of those 25 milligrams come from the recycling system. So we're only supposed to be eating 1 milligram a day. And the average person probably gets about 70 milligrams in their diet. And they're not even thinking about it because they think they're anemic. And no one's told them that, well, if you're going to have that much iron, you really should be pounding down the liver and the copper supplements and the vitamin C and this and that. And no one knows this. Most of all, your doctor. They've not been taught this basic principle. And so the world is awash in this complete unknown. And then the last 2 years have been rather stimulating for everyone. But I've renamed what that time period was all about. And COV stands for copper's vanished, and ID stands for irons dysregulated. And what's real important for the listeners to understand is because the meme is you're anemic and you're copper toxic, the doctors cannot see COVID for what it is. Copper's vanished and iron's dysregulated. And so all of the symptoms, 100% of the symptoms of that, whatever it is, are related to those two minerals, and all the symptoms of the jab, those two minerals. And people can't believe it's that simple, but it is.
Wow. Hey, I got a question for you that's kind of oddball on the topic of the convid. Uh, about a year ago, about a year, you catch that CON?
Yeah, I got it.
About a year ago, I don't know. I saw I saw something on a video somewhere on social media or something where people were sticking magnets to themselves, like on their arm, at the injection site, and no one in my immediate circle chose to undergo that experiment.
Right.
But I tried it, and lo and behold, one of those little refrigerator magnets for a few days would stick right to my sternum, and there was a pull on it, and it was very interesting.
Wow.
And troubling, and I just went about living my best life and kind of forgot about it. But then I tested it on a very close friend of mine, and she was magnetic on her whole upper torso and on her arms, and she had not had any sort of injection. And I reached out to all the people that I knew that I've interviewed and things like that, and there were a number of theories that went around, and the ones that got closest to it, and maybe you have some insight on this, had to do with iron and in a low oxygen environment. And I didn't know if it was from shedding or spike proteins. I mean, I'm trying to put this together, but it's very abnormal, whatever it is. And so have you heard of that or looked into that at all? And do you think there is a relation with iron?
Yeah, well, I think it definitely has a relationship with iron. I mean, I'm certainly aware of the people post-shot having that tendency. You're blowing my mind, though, that people who just got exposed to it didn't get the actual shot. Here's what's really going on, and this is going to be the geek side of the conversation, and your listeners can kind of turn down the volume if they don't want to hear this. But there's a Dr. Merchant, Merchant, and she wrote, first name Susan, she wrote very important articles, 2006, 7, and 8, where she's talking about enzyme functions that are copper dependent and enzyme functions that are iron dependent. And there are 7 that she profiles in particular. And in higher order species, they're supposed to be copper driven. And in lower species, they're supposed to be iron driven. And what I can tell you is happening is, again, going back to uh, some of the changes in farming and changes in food processing and changes in pharmaceuticals, is we have a whale of a lot of iron in our body that that our ancestors very likely did not have. And let me explain that a very important piece of research was done at University of Wisconsin in Madison in 1928. And Dr. Hart and three of his colleagues decided to take rodents and deny them copper in their diet. And they wanted to see, gee, what's going to happen? And what happened was their livers filled up with iron. That's 1928. And many scientists replicated that study. But then in 2021, Kim and Gonzalez decided to look at it genetically. And this is for the hardcore gearheads out there. They're just going to just dig this so much. So they picked out 10 genes, 3 that had to do with zinc, 3 that had to do with copper, and 4 that had to do with iron. And they denied copper to the rodents, and they were measuring the mRNA expression of these 10 genes. What's going to happen? Only one gene changed, and it's the protein ferritin light chain. So people are familiar with the ferritin protein. It's an iron storage protein. Well, it comes in 2 flavors, light and heavy. Heavy requires copper, light, not so much. And the ferritin light chain took off like a rocket in the face of copper deficiency. And where does the ferritin light chain express itself? First and foremost, in the liver. And so what Kim and Gonzalez were able to do is genetically prove that Hart, Steinbach, Waddell, and LVM back in 1928 were way ahead of their time. And what's happened is copper has only been the #1 nutrient deficiency on the farm for 80 years. Nothing to worry about here, folks. Nothing to see here. And so copper's been suppressed. And guess what's been building in our body? Iron, especially in our liver. But what you're sharing with me is that maybe it's expressing itself all over the body. Would never even have thought of that. And what's particularly unsettling about your breastbone is the thymus is hanging out behind the breastbone. Guess what the thymus is supposed to be filled with?
Copper?
Copper.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And so, is there iron in our skeletal structure? Of course there is. There's a lot more calcium, but iron is certainly a part of that structure, but there's a lot of magnesium and probably a dozen other minerals. But that's very unsettling to think about magnets sticking to the tissue.
Yeah.
But basically what Dr. Merchant is saying is that our higher order physiology is being regressed back to a lower order structure and function, which is
Yeah.
that's kind of scary to think about.
Well, when you look at the rates of disease and the decline of health of the entire civilization, it's not surprising. On that note of the magnetic skin and sternum and whatnot, at that point, just kind of spitballing with a few people and thinking that there might be some iron dysregulation at the heart of that. Well, one thought was that perhaps it was graphene oxide that was being picked up from people around us. But I did resume donating blood at that time and also stepped up my copper considerably. And I haven't, when we moved, I lost those little refrigerator magnets. So I'm actually going to grab one off Amazon and try it again and see, maybe that helped. And maybe my friend, if she's still magnetic, I'll get her to donate some blood and see if it changes anything. But yeah, I just thought, man, if anyone could see a correlation there, it'd probably be you since you're the iron expert here. But yeah, it was actually very troubling because it's so unnatural. I was just thinking, what the hell are they doing to us, man? You know?
Well, and it is unnatural. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
And I think people need to at least open up to the idea that there's more to the story. I think that you don't have to do a total deep dive, but what I think what we learned from the last couple of years is we've learned to ask more questions, and I think we've learned to demand better answers. And I'm not sure they're all forthcoming, but people need to realize that that there are two really important things that I took benefit of from the last 2 years. I learned that viruses are excrement of parasites. That's a good thing to know. That's really important to know. That's why ivermectin worked. So that's just good for people to know that. But what I was inspired to do in a fit of passion, because I was really getting tweaked by the whole experience, as I'm sure everyone else was, I decided to go into the literature to see how many articles I could find to prove that copper runs the immune system. And I stopped at 52.
Wow.
The one that really set me off was 2008, that showed very clearly that copper stopped SARS-CoV. And I thought, okay, so the whole thing's an interesting experience. And so the thing
Oh,
that people
man.
don't realize is that it takes energy and intelligence to run our immune system. And copper provides both. And that's never been talked about openly. Certainly not trained, people are not trained that way. Practitioners are not trained to think that. And they're taught about all of this smoke and mirrors. And what I've really tried to do is bring it down to its essence. And, I'm sure there was a time years ago when you got a birthday present or some holiday present and didn't have a battery. Was that toy as much fun to play with? No. And that's how our immune system works. If the copper battery is not there, it doesn't work. And people need to realize it's like it's that simple. No, it's not a whole lot more complicated than that. And I think it's time for the public to be more aware of just how amazing their body is, how intelligent it is, how it has these incredible pathways of course correction, but they all require energy and intelligence. And I've gotten to the point now where, and I'm right on the edge of kind of woo woo here, but I really believe that copper is the God particle. And when you begin to understand its role in the nucleus, in the mitochondria, in all sorts of immune pathways, you can't help but wonder, wow, how did they keep this such a secret? I mean, it's absolutely amazing when you really get into it. And then if copper's off, the wheels come off the
Well,
train.
that's very interesting, especially in light of how much attention mitochondrial function has been receiving in the past few years. I mean,
Well,
in mainstream medicine, alternative medicine, I mean, it's all about mitochondrial function and energy production, ATP. I mean, you hear about this stuff all the time. I've done numerous shows on different ways to improve your mitochondrial function, whether that's depleting your deuterium or taking something like urolithin A or
right.
different and NAD injections, all of this kind of stuff is all around mitochondria. And other than your work, I've not heard, honestly, I'm not trying to blow smoke here either,
No,
but I've literally never heard one person mention the word copper once ever
no.
in a conversation about mitochondria, of which there have been numerous. So it is really interesting
So
that
here's,
it's
here's a really
just
good
so
question,
overlooked.
because you're very well versed. So how many atoms of copper in the average mitochondria?
I've heard you talk about it, but I don't remember.
Well,
I love
thank
getting the right answer too.
yeah, I know. So thank God for Paul Kobine at Auburn University. See, the yeast are the models for mammals. Did you know that yeast are mini mammals? It's amazing.
Oh.
Their physiology is identical to ours. It's just really tiny. And Paul Kobine big copper guy down at Auburn. He figured it out in 2004 and 2006. 50,000 atoms of copper in each mitochondria. Now,
Wow.
yeah, that's a lot of copper, right? Or at least we think it is. So then let's talk about how much mitochondria do we have in our body? We have 40 quadrillion mitochondria. That's 15 zeros. 40 quadrillion. Now, we all can go back to our high school biology text. And we remember that page that had the cell in it, right? The one page that had the cell. And how many mitochondria were in that picture? 2, maybe 3? Well, it's important for people to know that that was drawn by Walt Disney.
Ha,
It has nothing to do with reality.
that's funny.
Yeah. The average cell has 500 mitochondria. Average liver cell, 2,000. Average kidney cell, 4,000 mitochondria. Your heart cells, 10,000 mitochondria. For the women in the audience who are still cycling, average mature egg in a woman's body, 600,000 mitochondria. And it's mind-boggling. That makes, we certainly understand what PMS is about now. And so then we get to the brain. And there are some neurons, especially in the substantia nigra, 2 million mitochondria. So people don't understand the orders of magnitude when we're talking about fatigue. Like, let's take Parkinson's. What is Parkinson's? Is when the substantia nigra fritzes out. Well, there's 990,000 neurons in the substantia nigra, and they each have 2 million mitochondria. And what is Parkinson's? When 2/3 are burned out. Think about the loss of energy production, the loss of copper, the accumulation of iron. And no one thinks about it in those terms. And what I came upon as I began to do the research daily, and at daily, I mean 7 days a week. Yeah, I'm kind of goofy that way. But as I began to, I'm really good at pattern recognition. That's probably the greatest gift I was given. Um, and I began to realize that every disease has this dynamic of oxidative stress overwhelming the production of energy. Because if oxygen can't become water to release energy, it becomes exhaust. It becomes what I call it accidents with oxygen. It becomes oxidants. Well, we know what an antioxidant is. Well, the oxidants are different forms of oxygen with extra electrons, and it causes the oxygen to act out and create chaos. Who's clearing the chaos? Copper enzymes.
Ah, of course.
But so copper's got to work both sides of the fence. It's got to work. Hey, we got to make water. Oh no, we got some accidents. Let's clear those. And when the accident starts to build up, copper gets preoccupied over here and can't be focusing over here. And it's like, it's amazing. And I think the model for people to use as an analogy, we all have kitchens in our home. And the kitchens all have appliances that have got refrigerators, stoves, and microwaves. And what are they made of?
Hopefully, no one listening to this podcast has microwave.
We don't here, but I'm trying to be.
I got you. I got you.
But the thing is, what's the metal that those are all made out of? Steel, which is iron. In the world of conventional medicine and conventional healing, all of the optics and all of the spotlights are on the appliances, folks. What's missing? The cuisine artists, I spell it differently, CU-ISINE. So you can see the symbol for copper. Does the stove know what's for dinner? Does the stove know which pot to bring out? Does the stove know how to turn on the heat and how long to cook it? Of course not. And what's absolutely amazing is when you get into mitochondrial physiology. All of the articles are about the heme this, heme that, and that's the stove. And what is it's called heme A3, and that's the stove that holds oxygen. It's really cool. It's in complex 4. But there's a cuisine artist, and that's copper. And it slices and dices the oxygen, turns it into water, and voila, energy can be released. And no one talks about the chef. Everyone talks about the stove. It's like, come on, this
Wow.
has got to
Hmm.
change. It's
Wow.
absolutely
Well, hopefully we're doing something to change it here. I mean, there's going to be a couple tens of thousands of people that hear this, and many of them probably health practitioners or doctors in some capacity too. And I'll definitely be sharing this because I've already texted your podcast to I don't know how a number of different providers and friends of mine and functional medicine doctors I've worked with and stuff like that. And I'm like, you got to get the iron copper thing. Listen to this. So that maybe they can then translate some of that back to me from their body of knowledge. But I do want to back up to something because I'd be remiss to not answer a question that I think is probably going on in many people's minds, and this has to do going back to iron with this idea of anemia. And admittedly, I don't know a lot about this because it's not something I've been diagnosed with, but I do hear in the periphery quite often, oh, I need to take iron because my doctor did my labs and says that I'm anemic. And I hear this more so from women.
sure.
So, is there a legitimate form of anemia? And if so, how would one deal with that in the context of the root cause protocol? If it's not so much a real issue and it's or very rare and it's an iron dysregulation thing, what other than maybe we could go into donating blood, but what are some of the ways that we could actually deal with the iron? So I guess let's kind of just back up and cover the anemia
Yeah.
thing, if you
Right.
would, just to clear up any confusion for people out there that are hearing otherwise from their doctor.
Tons of confusion. So the two classic forms of anemia are uh, iron deficiency anemia, and then the anemia of chronic inflammation. It's sometimes called the anemia of chronic disease. I call it the anemia of copper deficiency because that's really what it is. So again, um, when you get into analyzing blood work, there are three markers that really are important to understand the full expression of iron in the body. And the problem we've got, Luke, is we're just dealing with it in the blood. We, there's no easy way to get into the tissue other than a needle biopsy of the liver, very painful, you first, or an Tesla 2 MRI, very expensive, again, you first. But the thing is, the metrics that are used are, I actually, anyone who really wants to understand their iron needs to request all three measures: hemoglobin, serum iron, and ferritin. Let
Is
me
this
explain.
is this what the full Monty blood panel
Mhm.
demonstrates? Okay. And by
Yep.
the way, for those listening, I'm sure I'll have alluded to this in the intro, but I recently, finally, after years of wanting to do this panel, I just did the full Monty panel, and so we're gonna, take a quick peek at that later. But carry on so that people know that one can find this
Yep.
specific panel that you're speaking of.
So from 19, from 18, I guess from the Civil War, basically, to 1972, doctors knew to measure iron status by measuring hemoglobin, because that's where 70% of body iron is tied up in red blood cells. 70%. This enormous bolus of iron is in our red blood cells. Again, every second, 2.5 million. Amazing. So a lot of iron tied up there. And second bolus is ferritin, ferritin protein, storage depot. Is ferritin protein is like an ATM machine. You know, need money, got to get it. You know, and so the cell will draw from that ferritin protein. But there's a catch. The ferritin protein's inside the cell. It's not supposed to be in the blood. The ferritin protein, in order for it to work, requires copper. And ferritin that's showing up in the blood work is because of pathology, usually in the liver. And the iron recycling program is not working right because there's a buildup of iron. And the ferritin is getting cleaved the lysosome. Lysosome is the stomach of the cell, where a lot of stuff gets, it's like a garbage disposal, if you will. And the ferritin protein is getting synthesized, but before it gets released out of the cell and put into the blood, iron is dumped into the lysosome. And that's the start of lipofuscin, for those of you who are really worried about age spots and things like that.
Especially if you're taking a crap load of fish oil every day.
Yeah.
Or seed oils and,
Exactly.
these other PUFAs, yeah.
But the important thing is iron is the match to cause lipid peroxidation. So I focus on the iron. I'm very, very aggressive about the seed oils, what have you, but we got to deal with this iron issue. I think it's 10 times more important than the PUFAs. Not everyone agrees with me. But the thing is, the ferritin is only 10%. And then something even smaller percentage is the serum iron. But I think it's one of the most important because it's revealing the recycling program. And in a woman's body, serum iron should be about 100. And in a guy's body, it should be about 120. And so when it's not where it's supposed to be, then you begin to understand there's inefficiency in the recycling program. And what's happening, and to get to your question, Luke, practitioners are only doing ferritin studies, ferritin only studies. And that's just not kosher. I don't think it should be legal, to be honest, because it's not revealing the totality of what's going on in the body. And this, I saw a comment in an email thread the other day, which just distressed me beyond belief. This was written by a physician talking about the convid and the fact that the spike protein affects hemoglobin and it causes iron to get released, and that iron is picked up by the serum ferritin, and then the ferritin has to take it back to the tissue. I just went, oh my God, it doesn't do that at all. It has nothing to do with there's no iron in that ferritin. It's just, and this idea that what's a little fairy system that's going to take it back to the tissue? It's like, it doesn't work that way. And so as ferritin rises, it's a sign of inflammation. When it got my attention was when my ferritin was 237. And that's when I really started to take a deeper dive to understand what is going on. And so rising ferritin is easy. We've got serious pathology. It's the single digit ferritin that's the conundrum. And only a couple authors have talked about this. But long story short, and maybe we can pick this up in another conversation, but serum ferritin at single digit, it's pretty much a lock that you've got parasites. And it's affecting the spleen, and the recycling program is not working right. And so the doctors and practitioners are misinterpreting low ferritin. They're not doing serum iron. They're not doing hemoglobin. They don't have a 360 view of what's going on. They're not measuring copper status, ceruloplasmin, vitamin A and D. They're not looking at magnesium in the red blood cell. They don't understand that all of this is working together. And so they're putting this spotlight on serum ferritin. Oh, yours is low. You need to take iron. The course record for iron is one of my students. She's in the Pacific Northwest, 80. 80 iron infusions.
Oh my God.
And
Oof.
when she and I had our first conversation 8 years ago, she was a bit dismissive of what I was saying. Let's just leave it at that. But then she started to study it. She became a student. And a few months ago, she was very proud to post on Facebook a picture of her arm giving blood for the first time in her life. I think she's late 40s, early 50s, but it was the first time in her life her hemoglobin was normal because she was focusing on copper. And so the issue is everybody wants to know, does anemia really exist? What they're referring to is iron deficiency anemia. I don't believe there is such a thing as iron deficiency anemia. Iron, about 35% of the Earth's composition is iron. It's the number one element on the planet, iron. And prior to 2020, I would have argued that humans were the most evolved species on the planet. Now I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
But the point is, what anemia means, if iron is the number one element, what anemia means is that the most evolved species on the planet has lost the ability to metabolize the number one element on the planet, and that doesn't pass the sniff test. And then when you get into the research, you find out, oh, wow, you can't make heme without copper. You can't make hemoglobin without copper. You can't recycle red blood cells without copper. You can't do anything if it involves iron without copper. But that's not taught in conventional training. And what I believe dominates the planet, and iron deficiency anemia is the number one deficiency on planet Earth, according to the World Health Organization. And you can take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I think they've lost a little of
A
their
little bit.
trustworthy status over the past
But
couple of years.
but in 2012, that was their assertion.
Sure, sure.
But the point is, I would argue, and I can, give me a couple hours, man, and I can prove it. But I would argue that it's actually copper deficiency anemia is what dominates the planet, and it's causing iron dysregulation anemia, which you alluded to in your comments. So it's important for people to draw the distinction between iron deficiency, because it shows low in the blood work. That doesn't mean that it's not being dysregulated in the tissue. And so iron deficiency is not being interpreted properly because they're not taking into account iron dysregulation.
Got
And
it.
dysregulation is entirely a copper issue.
Got it. Okay, so for someone listening that's facing this information and is in that sort of conundrum, would a simple recommendation be that is, not reckless and totally ignorant of what their health providers are sharing with them, to order a full Monty panel online to get more accurate biomarkers around the iron piece, and then work with a root cause protocol practitioner or you yourself and
Yeah.
go through that and just kind of get a alternate point of view from that perspective?
I would encourage people to get the book, learn the argument of the book. The first half of the book is what's the problem. Second half of the book is what's the solution. But what Luke is recommending, which I think is a solid game plan, is the request a test, which is an online ordering.
Yeah, that's where I got mine. Yeah.
It is called the Full Monty Iron Panel, and it's like $275 or something like that. I don't see a lick of that. I don't want you thinking I'm pimping for lab work. And yeah, work with a practitioner. I've trained hundreds, and these people will be able to work with you and identify a series of very simple, straightforward recommendations to begin to introduce the nutrients that are missing, very likely missing, in your diet, that are going to help to fire up the recycling system. And I think people are always pleasantly surprised when they're like, like this woman with 80 iron infusions. She was, I think,
I
she
can't
was,
believe she even lived through that. I mean, God
it's
bless
amazing.
her.
It's absolutely, it is a miracle.
Oh
And she's a
man.
real testament to the resilience of the human body. And she's just this lovely individual who just has such commitment to want to help her fellow man now and fellow woman because
Yeah.
she knows that there's been a lot of misdirection of the truth. And there are millions of people out there like that. And it's just it should make people really nervous that there's such confusion about the number one element on the planet, and it's been deemed anemic, and it just doesn't make any sense. And yet, the most important element going back in time, when oxygen first appeared on the planet, it was copper who saved the day, and it was called the Great Oxygen Event. And it's like the world was anaerobic before oxygen came on the scene. And when there was 1/10 of 1% oxygen in the atmosphere, 99% of life disappeared. Well, that's a pretty powerful impact. And it was copper that brought life on this planet. All life on this planet requires copper. And it's like, how do we not know that?
Wow.
So it's just so
Are,
important.
so yeah, well, thank you for distilling that down. And I like to give people a solid takeaway, and I want to let everyone know that you can find. I know we're covering a lot here, but you can find all the show notes and links at lukestory.com/Morley, Morley. I want to ask just a couple things about the iron piece, and then I'm sure the question is being begged. Okay, how do I get more copper? And I know you have some strategies for that are very solid. Um, donating blood is probably the most effective way to offset this iron overload, at least piece. And I've been doing that off and on for, I don't know, probably 15 years, not as much as I would have liked to. And we'll find out if I've been doing it enough when we look at my full Monty panel in a moment. But have you ever come across, anyone that you've worked with doing consultations or any of your coaches, a standard case scenario where it's not advised for someone to donate blood? And if so, is the, doing a full Monty panel and getting a realistic picture of what's going on a smart thing to do rather than just running off and donating blood quarterly, just assuming that you have too much iron?
Yeah, no, I think it's very important to be cautious and I appreciate your kind of putting the brakes on it. But the thing is, I was just talking with a client today. Um, Low hemoglobin. She's had low hemoglobin her whole life, low serum iron, low ferritin. And she says, and I know I'm iron toxic. I said, I know you're iron toxic, but we can't be pulling blood out of your body right now. And she says, I know. So, I mean, she's been following the work for probably about a year. But she's been going through a lot of stress and flux, and now she's ready to kind of really hone in. And so there are situations where it just is not advisable, even though I can argue till the cows come home that both Luke and I have too much iron in our tissue. It may not be advisable for us to just dive in. And for people who are new to this, it may be unadvised to do that, ill advised to do that. And I think you're much better to understand the context, understand the argument, get the data, and then have a conversation with someone who understands this before you run to your favorite blood donating center and
Yeah.
just say, gee, what happens? Because it's not, excuse me, it's not going to kill you, but it could make you feel really uncomfortable for several days. And that's just not advisable. We're not
Got it.
putting,
Got it. Okay, that's great. Yeah, interestingly enough, anytime historically that I've donated blood, I feel better and better every time I do it, which is pretty telling to me. Provided, and I learned this the hard way 2 donations ago, I didn't eat enough before I went in, and I didn't bring an adrenal cocktail or something with salt and sugar in it to drink, and I got quite lightheaded. But after that, in the subsequent days to follow, I mean, my energy is completely off the charts. I had another kind of niche question about regulating iron. I interviewed someone about colostrum the other day, and I've been using colostrum for a long, long time, and just my body just really responds well to it. So I just intuitively keep taking it. And they were mentioning that the lactoferrin in colostrum, of which I understand is quite high, helps with the regulation of iron. Are you aware of that? Do you think that's true and worth taking colostrum?
yeah, no, that, so one of the great crimes against humanity was the pasteurization of milk. Unprocessed milk is amazing, and it has just a modest 50 enzymes in it. You know? What does pasteurization do? Kills all those enzymes. What are the two
Yeah.
most What are the two most important enzymes? Lactoferrin and ceruloplasmin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so lactoferrin is found in breast milk, in cow's milk, mother's milk, and why is it there? Because Mother Nature knows that if iron gets into the baby's system, it's going to attract pathogens. That's why it's there. And lactoferrin has a very close relationship with ceruloplasmin, and they fire up the immune system. And what's the preoccupation in obstetrics? Iron and vitamin D. What do they completely ignore? Magnesium, copper, and retinol. If you want a healthy baby and a healthy pregnancy, you better focus on magnesium, copper, and retinol. The last thing you need to worry about is iron and vitamin D. And how much iron and vitamin D is in breast milk? None. There is no vitamin D in breast milk. And there's not supposed to be any iron either. And yet, Nestle seems to know better than Mother Nature.
Yeah.
And there's an outrageous amount of iron and vitamin D. And that's a complete violation of Mother Nature, of our programming. And so lactoferrin plays this very pivotal role in making sure that iron levels are kept at proper levels in the blood. And it's a great support. If you've got optimal ceruloplasmin, you probably don't need as much lactoferrin.
Cool. All right, good. Yeah. I didn't even think about the lactoferrin in a good high quality raw milk. I was just intrigued by
Yeah.
learning that colostrum itself is loaded with it, and I would presume
Mm.
even more so than the regular milk. Okay, so $1 million question here. Okay, we're understanding the iron piece a bit, and I'm sure people are listening, going, "All right, where do I get this copper? Do I just go buy a copper pill?" I from my understanding, some good sources of copper would be grass fed beef liver, uh,
Yep.
bee pollen, and whole food vitamin C. Are those kind of the heavy hitters in terms of naturally
Abs-
in a food base getting in your diet?
Absolutely, hands down. And the catch is, grass fed, as you noted, but the soil needs to be mineralized.
I know. See, that's what because I've been getting this great raw milk and grass fed liver from a farm here nearby where I am in Texas, and I haven't asked the farmer like, "Hey, are you putting copper sulfate in the alfalfa that the cows are eating?" You probably look at me like I was insane, which I am at times. But just to hedge my bets, I've always really resonated with bee pollen. Liver's challenging for me, but I freeze it, then I thaw it, and I cube it up, and I take a few chunks of it here and there when I can stomach it. But I recently started taking something called a brand called Sovereign Copper Hydrosol, and it
Oh,
looks like. Yeah, you familiar with that?
oh, absolutely. No,
The literature on it seems pretty impressive, not being a copper expert here, but the fact that it's got copper 1 and copper 2, the different forms, and the
yeah,
way they explain it makes it seem very bioavailable and also a low enough ppm that you're not going to overaccumulate too much. So I take, probably a tablespoon of that a day, and I,
beautiful.
I feel freaking amazing. I mean, since I really got on this and a lot of magnesium, and also the Rosita cod liver oil for the retinol. A lot of the things that you talk about, these nutrients that we're missing from our diet. The way I feel, especially the energy as we started this conversation, and just noticing a lack of fatigue, it's feeling amazing. So, in terms of people getting more copper into their diet, what could you say about some of those methods, or if you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think the three food-based forms you've identified are really the core. Um, and the three that I recommend for as supplements too, if you will, copper hydrosol is always number one because it's just a great form. up in the Pacific Northwest, there's a company called Reverse Skin Aging, and they have a copper cream. It's a 3% VIP copper cream. It's transdermal. Some people,
Wow.
so there's a cream for women, there's a serum for guys. Guys don't like creams as much, I don't think. So copper hydrosol, copper cream. And then out of my revenge for convid was just stick it to the bear. So I took a form of a desiccated beef liver and spirulina and a little splash of turmeric and added copper bisglycinate to it. And it's called Recuperate.
Oh, cool, cool.
And people that way people know how clever I am, right? But it's really being met with some real excitement. People are finding, again, just as you noted, again, I don't want people thinking I'm pimping a product because I'm not. What I'm pimping is let's get well. Let's get our body back into um, homeostasis. And there's just about two handfuls of nutrients we need to do it right. And I really think it's important for people to get supplemental copper because it is so missing in our diet. And the sources that we talk about as food-based forms, they're great, but they're not perfect. And these other forms that we're talking about as supplemental forms, I would encourage people to do all three. And the
Yeah.
thing is, what we need, what they'll tell us is that we need 2 milligrams of copper a day. Well, when you go back in the literature, what you'll find is back in the 30s, they were recommending 4 to 6 milligrams a day.
Oh,
And,
interesting.
and the upper limit, according to the NIH, again, is it just is it as trustworthy as it was? I don't know. But 10 milligrams is considered the upper limit. So I think the body has a lot more capacity. And what is the RDA for copper? Zero point 0.9 milligrams.
Oh my God.
Folks, we absolutely need more copper. Please get more. I've teased about it, but I said if someone suddenly were to break into this condo, put a gun to my head and say, okay, boil down 10 years of research into one phrase. Please just get more copper in your diet. And it makes such a difference in how you'll feel. And it will help your body to regulate the iron and the oxygen, and the rest is history. But it's such a overlooked piece of the puzzle. And I think what's exciting now, Luke, is there are more options that are becoming available. And I think we're entering a new era. The earliest recorded use of copper for healing was the Smith papyrus in 5700 BC. It's a long time ago.
Wow.
They knew
You
how to
know,
use copper.
I was thinking about, I often just reflect on the people of antiquity and how they thrived. And I was thinking about how popular it is even still in India for people to drink water out of copper vessels. And then I'm sure you are aware that goes back through Ayurvedic medicine, God knows how long. Were they picking up copper from storing their water like that, or were they just doing it to prevent the growth of bacteria and whatnot?
It was as a sanitizer.
Oh,
Absolutely.
okay. Do you think it
And
had the added benefit of getting some copper
oh,
in your body, or does it
I'm
not work
sure,
that way?
I'm sure it does. But I'm a little cautious about that with the use of sanitized water. I just don't know how those chemicals are going to react.
Yeah.
But what's one of the most prized elements in Ayurvedic medicine is peacock feathers. And what color are they? They're very vibrant blue. And why are they vibrant blue?
Copper.
Copper. Copper.
That's funny. Wow, how cool. How
And this
cool.
protein that we're talking about, ceruloplasmin,
Yeah.
it means blue plasma. It's that same color as the peacock. There's a part of our brainstem called the locus ceruleus. In Latin, it means blue dot. It has
Huh.
10 times more copper in the locus ceruleus than any other brain region in our head.
Wow. Wow,
It's
interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. Well, that's cool, man. I feel like we've given, people some actionable steps here and a good overview. like I said before we started, we're probably going to have to do a series of at least four because I want to do a show on magnesium. I want to do a show on retinol, and we just don't have time within the context of this conversation. But I think as far as the copper and iron goes, it's a good launching pad. So perhaps now could be a good time. Perhaps we could dig into, briefly, however much you have time for. I'm very interested, of course, personally to find out because I feel like I've been living, an extremely healthy lifestyle for a very long time. But I'm curious to see what my HTMA,
Sure.
the hair test, and my recent full Monty panel reveal. And I think for the first time ever, I'm going to try something, and that is to share my screen with you so that in the actual video recording of this conversation, people who care to can actually take a look at the test themselves. How does that sound?
Cool. And what I would like to do, if we have some orientation here, what I did is I analyzed your results and put it in a schedule that I use so
Oh,
people
cool.
feel sense of what's going on.
Okay.
Because what we've got on the right-hand side on the screen is this is the actual results coming back from the lab, but it's not in a form that you can actually interpret it and say, "Oh, I know what's going on." What does stand out, Luke, is aluminum.
Yeah, I know. I know. Thank you. I've been chugging what's it called? Silica. I've been taking the Organo Living Silica because I've
Mhm.
done so many metals detoxes and saunas. I did the L. Ron Hubbard niacin sauna thing years ago. I'm like, how do I have that much aluminum? It must be all the chemtrails I've been breathing in LA for 32 years.
Maybe so. No, it's a striking elevation, and it'll come down. And what we is this the first hair test you've ever done?
I've done a few actually, and I haven't really compared the older ones. But at a glance, looking at the metals, I would say that all of my metals over time have continued to go down.
Okay.
And this aluminum one, I don't recall the past test if it was that high, but the other, lead, mercury, and all these things, I have been able to knock back considerably over
Great.
the years.
Yeah. No, it's just aluminum ties up transferrin, and that's going to affect the iron status. So it's just something for people to be aware of. But that was a notable elevation. Um, and then what Luke has on the left hand side is the actual results from the lab for the full Monty iron panel. Um, so I'll work with what you've got here, just so we have a chance to delve in.
Okay,
Um, and then what I'll do is show you the analysis of your hair test in just a minute, so you get a
cool.
better sense of it. So what we see here, there's different sections, obviously, of the blood test, and what we're looking at in the first section is the iron. And what I'm particularly keying in on is it's called iron. It's iron in the serum. It's the recycling iron that we were talking about. And Luke's is at 96, which is good. Ideally, it should be 120, but 96 is actually pretty decent. And what I'm also looking at is that there's something called TIBC, total iron binding capacity. And what happens is that there's a protein, a transport protein called transferrin, and it transports iron in this recycling program that we're talking about. It gets iron back to the bone marrow where it goes to be made into new blood cells or goes to the liver to be stored. And the total iron binding capacity is the total number of docking stations for iron in the blood. When a guy's blood, it should be about 340, maybe 350. And so yours is a little lower than ideal. And as a result of that, your percent saturation is 32%. So that's a little higher than I like to see it. I like to see it closer to 20 to 25%. 32 is fine, nothing to stress about. But the closer you are to 20%, the lower your chance of ever getting cancer.
Oh, nice.
The closer you are to 60%, the greater your chance of getting cancer. So this is something that anyone can do for the rest of their life. take their serum iron, divide it by TIBC, and see what the number is. And you want to keep it down closer to 20 to 25%. Then we've got vitamin A. Luke's got a rocking vitamin A, 61. That's beautiful. It's very
Great.
strong.
That's
Yeah,
that it's that Rosita cod liver oil.
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, the other side of it is vitamin D. Now, what the listeners probably don't know is I'm a bit of a heretic when it comes to vitamin D. I don't believe in it the way everyone else does. Um, and I like I like to see vitamin D around 21, and that's based on a study by Mohammed Amer at Johns Hopkins. So people need to understand I'm from Baltimore. My nickname is Baltimorely, and I think Hopkins is where it's at. And so when they come out with a study that rocks the world, because Michael Hollick wants it up in the 70s to the 100, that never made sense to me. 21, now we're talking. Back in the 80s, a healthy vitamin D was 12, and people don't know that. And so your vitamin D is elevated. It's much higher than I would have expected to see it, but it might be that you're very active outside, and for whatever reason,
Yeah, I do get a lot of sun and have for years and years, you know?
this is peak sun season that we're measuring right now.
Mhm.
So again, keep that in mind. I'm not in any way criticizing. It's just I like to see the number for retinol, vitamin A, be 3 times higher than the number for vitamin D.
Got it, got it. So that ratio, do you think that, someone's genetics in terms of how they, metabolize vitamin D would play a role in that recommendation? So I understand some people have a more difficult time assimilating or processing vitamin D than others.
Yeah, there's no question that that can be a factor. What is the completely overlooked factor is magnesium. Magnesium, if magnesium is not at optimal levels, there's no way vitamin D metabolism can be optimal.
Ah,
Um,
got it.
that's going to throw everything off. I'm not sure what is behind this, other than I would assume a lot of sunshine, which is
Yeah,
that's fine.
cool.
So then we get to ceruloplasmin, and where Luke is getting an A+ in retinol, which is very cool. It's like a B- for ceruloplasmin.
Wah, wah.
Yeah. So technically, ceruloplasmin should be 30. So Luke is about 7.5 clicks off, and so that doesn't surprise me. That's about average. Most people are in the low 20s. And what's important is to um, do the ratio of copper to ceruloplasmin. Now here's the catch. Luke's copper is almost perfect, 99. But you can't get better than 99. But 99 divided by 22.4, that's 4.42. 442. Those were fun cars. And it should be 3.33. So there's a big difference between a 442 and a 333. And so what that tells us is there's some level of inflammation in your system. Despite all that you're doing, my guess is that your liver isn't as pristine as you think it is. And in a low copper diet, you're going to get iron buildup in the liver, and that's going to affect the production of ceruloplasmin. So that would
Oh, nice, nice. Well, it's interesting because when I did this test, I had donated blood within a couple months before it,
okay.
and then subsequently went and donated again after this. So I'm curious to see what that number will look like after a couple more donations, by the
Yeah.
end of the year, beginning of next year, to see if that in and of itself has an impact.
And maybe in a subsequent conversation, we can take a look at that follow up.
Cool.
But I think that'd be fascinating to see how your body is responding to the stimulus. So again, the thing is that, and the body will respond to these nutrients. And so the next marker here that's identified is zinc. Again, I'm not a big fan of zinc. Everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, it's the media darling." You just don't know the history of the copper zinc ratio, whose idea it was, and we'll do that in another conversation.
Okay.
But your zinc is strong at 90. I don't often see that. So my guess is you probably take zinc as part of your routine. Um, and it doesn't seem to have affected your copper, but something is getting in the way of your ceruloplasmin. And so that's so you've got strong retinol, strong copper. Your magnesium is a little on the low side, but the strong retinol and strong copper, you should be cranking on your ceruloplasmin. So something's holding it back.
Got
Just,
it.
just something to be aware of.
Okay.
Again, it's just the master antioxidant in the body.
Right. For those listening, in relationship to the zinc and copper being kind of those counterparts like magnesium and calcium, if someone was, listening to mainstream health advice and megadosing zinc, is it likely that they would be tanking their copper? Is that one of the reasons you're not a big cheerleader for it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And the other is when you get into the research of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, all the great scientists were obsessed with copper and iron because they're involved in energy production. And zinc was not even on the radar screen. Zinc didn't come on the scene until the late 60s. And so it's all a distraction as far as I'm concerned.
Got it. Well, I think that's something interesting about your work is that you often cite studies that are really old,
Mhm.
which to me is encouraging and it's a positive attribute of the work you do because I get the sense that air quotes studies have been largely co-opted and infiltrated by pharmaceutical interest as time has worn on. I mean, even when you're looking back into the 1950s and 60s, you have the Rockefeller Foundation and all of these kind of nefarious characters getting involved in academics and specifically the academics of medicine and influencing things, probably in some cases without our best interest in mind. So I like when you go way back to the early scientists who I happen to believe by and large were probably more pure in their intention than some of the studies that came later that we're seeing emerge now that just don't make any sense on their face.
No, I totally agree with you. And for those who are familiar with the movie It's a Wonderful Life, we've all grown up thinking that we lived in Bedford Falls, when in fact, we're actually living in Pottersville. People need to understand that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the current thinking may not be the most accurate. So your ferritin, um, 72, that's elevated. It's not high. High is, 300 and above for a guy and 150 and above for a woman. Doctors don't even take note of it until it's in the thousands. That should make people nervous. But 72 just says, yeah, you've got a slight elevation. And if you're on top of your blood donation, nothing to worry about. I think that's fine. The transferrin, what is it? That's 20, is it 25?
255.
Yeah. So people need to know that there's something called Morley math. And you got to move the decimal point over for transferrin. And so that the number for transferrin and the number for ceruloplasmin are both supposed to be 30. They're supposed to be in sync with each other. And why? Because those two proteins are the first line of defense in the human body because they're managing the status of iron in the blood on the premise that good bacteria are in our gut, the bad bacteria are in our blood. And ceruloplasmin and transferrin need to keep meticulous attention to the iron so they don't feed the bad bacteria. So your ceruloplasmin, a little bit low, transferrin's a little better, but still not at the peak. And so the mechanism to make transferrin is retinol. So you've got the retinol, and the mechanism to make ceruloplasmin is retinol and copper. You've got the retinol and the copper. I think there's a gear stuck in your liver. That would be my theory.
Got it. Okay. Noted.
And and would be willing to predict it's a parasite, and I'll explain why in a minute.
Ah, God.
Okay.
I did a few rounds of ivermectin, in the course of the past couple of years. Thought
Uh,
that would have banged them out. Maybe they don't get it. It doesn't get into the liver or something. All
uh,
right.
Now your hemoglobin is rocking 15.5. That's great. And
Okay.
you're
Great.
you're a great candidate for blood donations. You don't have anything to worry about. Your MAG RBC says, you're just below the threshold. The threshold is 5 to 7. I really like to see it at 6.5, not 4.9. And the lower it is, it means the more iron there's likely in the tissue. And where did I come up with 6.5? It was actually Charles Poliquin, who's a famous international trainer. You probably have heard the name.
Yeah. Yeah.
He wouldn't work with a client until their magnesium RBC was 6.5.
Wow. That's so interesting. And RBC is red
And
blood cell, right? So that's
the
actually
reason why that's important, so we got a bunch of red blood cells, right? We know
yeah.
that.
Yeah. I do now. Yeah.
They carry oxygen, right?
Yep.
But they make energy anaerobically. They can't activate that oxygen. It would explode if they did. And so anaerobic energy production has 10 enzymes. 8 of the 10 enzymes require magnesium. So if magnesium isn't ideal, it means that the lifespan of the red blood cell is not ideal. It's supposed to be 120 days. Under conditions of copper deficiency or magnesium deficiency, it can go down to 20 days. Why is that important? Because then suddenly you've just accelerated the whole process of turnover, which becomes a greater source of stress for the body, having to turn over those red blood cells even faster. And nobody thinks about that.
In
So
terms of the discrepancy on the full Monty blood panel versus the hair test on the right, it's showing my magnesium there, kind of even in the high range. What do you think that correlation's about, hair versus blood?
well, in the hair, it's showing that it's a loss.
Oh.
You're a stress cadet.
I got that right.
Right. No, and that's fine.
Yeah, yeah.
So as long as you know that, then you supplement to replace it.
Yeah, the funny thing is I take so much magnesium, but I guess you nailed it in that, the burn rate.
Right.
I'm a mover, man. I'm very active. I got a lot going on, as
Right.
most people do. But I would say over the past couple years leading up to these tests, year and a half specifically, I'm moving here and renovating a house and stuff has been one of the most stressful periods in a very long time, all while maintaining, normal life and a career and all that. So that makes perfect sense to me, despite my heavy magnesium regimen and take a few
And
different kinds. And, throughout the day, it's not even like one magnesium pill before I go to bed. I mean, I take a lot of it.
within the context of the greatest global stress the Earth has ever known.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
No, you can't ignore that. And
Yeah.
even though you didn't buy into it necessarily, it's always playing in your psyche.
Yeah, I mean, it's playing in my psyche when I get on an airplane and they, have me put on a graphene oxide,
Right.
you know, chemical laden
Right.
plastic mask. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's really, really important. So do you have the CBC or the CMP, whatever, the other blood tests that you've got? Do you have that loaded up?
Oh, the other one that I sent you?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I can pull that up.
For the audience, um, it says CBC with differential. And then you go down, you've got hemoglobin, hematocrit. Hematocrit is just 3 times hemoglobin. And what it translates to is what percent of the blood is iron. And so in Luke's situation, 44.7% of Luke's blood is iron. That's really healthy iron, healthy blood. The red blood, or the Red Cross loves you, I'm sure. So then we come down to a series of initials: MCV, MCH, MCHC, and RDW. This is a teachable moment. These four coordinates were developed by a famous physician named Max Weintraub. Where did he cut his teeth? Hopkins, of course. And he wrote the first textbook in hematology, but he went on to develop the medical program at the University of Utah. And it was a very copper-centric program. He was a really very influential figure. And when MCV, MCH, and MCHC are below the range, you know you have copper deficiency. And those three relate to hemoglobin status. RDW is the red blood cell distribution width. The red blood cell goes through a 2-day maturation process, and it gets really big, and then it needs to shrink in order to be considered healthy. In order to allow it to shrink, iron needs to get out of that red blood cell. And there's an exit door in the back, and it's called ferroportin, iron doorway, literally ferroportin.
Huh.
But there's a doorman there, and it's a copper doorman. If the copper is not there to open the doorway, iron can't get out, and the red blood cell is too big. It's not as effective. Why is this important? Because during convid, what they discovered, this was in April of 2020, was a team at Hopkins again. They discovered that the red blood cell was too big. And so what they realized is, oh my gosh, copper is under attack because the RDW is too high. So again, the first three, if they're below the range, and if RDW is above the range, those are four classic signs of copper deficiency that practitioners are not trained in. And then we come
Wow.
down to
That's so interesting. So what you're seeing here then is not showing that based on the reference ranges,
exactly,
right? Oh,
exactly.
cool.
You're in
Which
great
is
shape.
which correlates to the serum levels of copper that we looked at in the full Monty panel as well. Yeah, cool. I like that cross-referencing. That's neat. It's kind of, making sure nothing slips by.
Yeah. So then we get to these when the body's making blood, it makes a whole bunch of different blood. I mean, I probably would have been a hematologist if I'd never gotten into medical school, but thank God I didn't, because I wouldn't have this insight. But we've got neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils. Eos are eosinophils, and baeosinophils. Okay, they have different jobs. They're all part of the immune system. And there's these numbers are supposed to be in percentages. So it's 45%, 39%, 9%, what have
Yeah.
you. Neutrophils should be about 60%. And lymphocytes should be about 30%. And so it looks like there's an infection of some sort. Lymphocytes are flexing their muscles, right? But the real standout here is eosinophils. They should be 1 to 2%, and you're at 6%. And that would be an indication of parasites.
Wow.
And so, again, the mistake that a lot of people make is, well, I did a cell core, and I cleaned out all the parasites in my gut. Well, the parasites are all over the body. They're in the bone marrow. They're in the spleen. They're in the liver. My guess is there's a chance, Luke, that you might have a liver fluke that a cell core isn't going to touch.
Interesting.
And so that's where biomagnetism becomes an option, or bioresonance machines, or if you know anyone who has a violet laser, they're very effective at clearing parasites in the tissue. So again, I wanted to flag it because I thought
Yeah.
your listeners
Well,
would be interested.
I mean, my hope is that this isn't only good for me, that people are going to listen to or watch this and get an understanding of themselves, and hopefully do some of these labs and find someone that knows how to read them in a similar way. When you mentioned the infection, though, something came to mind. I recently been having some issues with tinnitus and such. And so a friend of mine in Florida, Dr. John Lawrence, who's been on the show a number of times, he had me get tested for something called Marcons, which is
Okay.
a antibiotic resistant infection in your sinuses. And I tested positive for it, unfortunately. So I'm undergoing this crazy nebulizer, the whole thing, this whole sinus, attack basically to get that out of there. But do you think an infection like that could have any impact on those numbers as well?
Absolutely. No
Okay.
question about
Okay.
it. Now, here's a little factoid. Uh, what color is your hair?
Mostly brown, thankfully.
Okay, mostly brown. It almost looks black on the screen on the monitor.
It's a dark brown. Yeah, it's dark brown.
Okay, so there's a fair amount of melanin in your hair. Now, one of my good friends is a Amish dairyman, carpenter, and just an all-around great guy. And he brought to my attention that there's some books written by an Australian animal farmer that are very important. There's natural goat care, sheep care, horse care, and cattle care. And I resisted for quite a while and finally gave in to his repeated suggestions that I read them. And they're four of the most important books I've read. But what Pat Colby, Coleby, the point that she makes, these books were written in like 2015, 2016, says any animal that is copper deficient will have parasites. Any animal that has parasites is copper deficient. And here's the catch. Any animal that has black hair, as black cat, black dog, black sheep, black Angus, black horse, gorilla, anyone with really dark hair, especially black hair, what do you think their copper requirement is compared to someone with like my color hair?
I'm just gonna guess probably more.
Would you believe 6 times more?
What? Oh my God.
And this is based on research out of Japan in the 60s. Now, I've not found the original research. I've got several people trying to track it down. I'll find it eventually, but the point is, what color hair do the Japanese have? It's black. Asians, black. Indians, black. African Americans, black. And if those people with black hair or really dark hair don't have copper, it becomes a major stressor for their body. And so
Interesting.
your copper looks great in the blood work, but I have a feeling you're under coppered because of the melanin production that's taking place in your body.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah, just something
Very
to think
cool.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna step it up. And I haven't been supplementing copper for very long either. So the values that we're seeing here, that seem okay are, I would say, relatively new because up until very recently I was getting very little copper in my diet other than what I would have gotten from,
Mhm.
liver capsules and bee pollen and things like that. But I definitely wasn't actually supplementing with it, the hydrosol like I am now.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Okay, cool. Wow.
And the other thing I'd point out real quick is the BUN creatinine ratio. And this is something that Jack Kruse talks about, and I think he's spot on. That it's a sign of oxidative stress in the kidney, and you want it really around 10. Ideally, it should be 10.
Okay.
When it gets above 10, it just means that there's some static in your kidneys, and it's a very copper-rich organ, which nobody knows about. And again, as you work with the protocol, as you up your copper, as you deal with your stress, as your life begins to settle down in this new location, your burn rate's going to go down, and so
Yeah.
then things are going to shift. But it's a good marker for people to know about that. That's a very easy area of indicating, am I under stress?
Wow, that's cool. I've never even heard of that. That's really interesting. Okay.
So those are some things that
Cool.
stand out in your
Okay.
work.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much. The thing I was disappointed in was my testosterone being at 533. I think last time I checked a few years ago, it was like in the 800s, and I'm going, and the free right now is at 12. I know that's not really your area of focus, but that was not knowing anything about this test other than that. I was like, we got to do something about that for sure.
Well, I wonder what impact iron is having on the sex hormone binding globulin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to flip it into estrogen, which is going to kill the testosterone.
Oh, interesting. Of course, iron's related to everything.
Well, it really is.
You know?
I think that's what's amazing is see, the thing is, if I had a magic wand, I would create a 3-day medical school. Day one, learn how to measure minerals. Day two, learn how to restore minerals. Day three, learn how to play golf.
That's great.
That's
That's
it.
great.
That's it. That's it. It really is. I mean, people are like, wait a minute, come on. So
That's funny. Well, I'm sure a lot of the doctors out there are pretty damn good at golf by now, but unfortunately, they seem to be missing a huge piece here in the iron and copper and all the things that we've been talking about.
well, they're
Um,
good at their golf irons, aren't they?
yes, yes. I'm going to remind people that the show notes for all the stuff we've covered will be found at lukestory.com/Morley. And before we go, Morley, tell us a bit more about these practitioners that have trained in the root cause protocol, and how people can find someone to work with. I'm assuming many people are going to hear this and want to go through something like we just did with either yourself. I don't know what your availability is, but some of your practitioners. I noticed that on Instagram now, for example, I see a lot of your practitioners are health coaches and have made their own businesses around this, and it's pretty prolific. I mean, this isn't like, oh, you got to talk to the one guy. It seems like a lot of people have adopted.
Yep.
So how would someone, find resources on your website, et cetera, if they wanted to get some of this work done and
Yeah.
explore this for themselves?
Yeah. I mean, they can start with the social media sites, the Magnesium Advocacy Group. Uh, and that's a group that really focuses on a lot of these issues. Then there's a page, the root cause protocol page.
On
But then
Facebook you're referring
on
to?
Facebook,
Okay,
absolutely.
cool, cool.
There is an Instagram account as well.
Okay.
Um, then if you really want to dig in, the website is RCP, Root Cause Protocol, rcp123.org. And that gets you into the treasure trove of all sorts of resources and information. There is a directory of consultants, people all over the world, again, trained probably about 500 people. And it's a really switched on community. They're very passionate about this process. They've all been healed by this process. So they have firsthand experience with it. And they're very well versed in these principles. They know what I'm talking about, and they know things that I don't even know about, which is kind of cool. But the core of their intervention is going to be around these principles that we've been discussing. And if there's a profile of what they do and what their area of expertise is. There are people that join our community. We have a RCP community where we have Q&As every other week. People get to ask the burning questions that are on their mind. And then there are people that do the training. It's a 16-week program. And it's got a online component. We have live class. We have case studies, a lot of reading material. Uh, it's a very robust program, and people really feel empowered and enlightened by the training. Whether they have a really high-end conventional degree, all the way down to being a mom wanting to take care of their family. So it attracts a full spectrum, and I can vouch for the caliber of the training, not just because the content that's there, but just the thought that went into the structure of it. And my colleague Kristen Kershaw has done an amazing job to pull that together, and really, she runs a very tight ship. And we have an alumni program for these people, and we're really establishing a professional niche, if you will, that never existed before. And it's very, very exciting. One of my guiding aphorisms is, if you really want to understand something, try to change it. And so
Right.
in order to understand conventional medicine, I had to change it. And so I've done that. And I do it with great respect, but with a great understanding that there's um, high areas of gaps in their knowledge. I tease doctors that their degree stands for mineral denialist, and that
That's good, that's
their
good.
diploma is printed on Swiss cheese. And it's just, they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing, is these types of conversations, Luke, give this opportunity for this truth and these concepts. It gives it legs so that more and more people can learn about this, and they can pass it on and spread the good news. And the ripple effect on this thing is mind blowing.
I would agree. I would agree. And just observing kind of the network of people that are following this protocol seems to be growing all the time. Because as I said, I heard you many years ago, and you were it was kind of an outlier in the alternative health scene, and you found your niche. And I didn't know that there were all these people that had started to amass around the work you're doing. But I will say something about that, and it has to do with what I was mentioning earlier in the kind of cult-like atmosphere that seems to form around thought leaders in the alternative medicine space.
Yeah, right.
And I gotta say, for some reason, your crew doesn't seem to have that, like, we're the only one that knows, everyone else is wrong kind of attitude. It doesn't seem to be as exclusive. Just as an observer, checking in on the different groups and practitioners you have, which I think is really healthy. It's like if everyone could kind of find common ground here, we'd make a lot more progress. So that's one. And then two, I really enjoy the perspective of, and I'm reminding myself of this because I have a tendency to kind of demonize, the system and the man myself. And that is, hey, we don't have to worry about, tearing down the existing paradigm. Why don't we just focus our energy on building a parallel paradigm
That's exactly.
that's continually innovating and isn't dependent on the confines of that old system, which is what you're doing. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to have this conversation with you, because I think there are easy solutions out there for people for a number of different
Yep.
pathologies and issues. And many of us, myself included, have chased our tails for years, knowing nothing about, for example, iron and copper. I mean, just those two, right? And so I'm really excited about the work you're doing. And I applaud you for, sharing it, and also for being someone who doesn't at all come across to me as someone who's just trying to slang supplements and scare everyone into buying your product. I mean, I guess you have your liver product with copper. You barely mentioned it for a second. I don't remember the name now.
Yeah,
We'll
that's
put it in the
good.
show notes, but I'm sure you're making a fine living training people and doing your thing. But I really feel from you that your motive is to build a new understanding and to truly help people, and that comes through. And I really appreciate that. I share that sentiment myself.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm really, and I think maybe you are as well, but I'm doing my life's work. I'm, I'm,
Yeah.
I'm blessed to do that. And what I've come to realize is that my purpose in life is to help people like you, your listeners, people that I work with, get over some physical barrier that they've got so they can get on with their purpose in life.
Yes.
Because we're all here
Yes.
for a
That's
reason,
it. That's
right?
it.
We're
Yeah.
all here with certain gifts. We're meant to learn our lessons, but we're supposed to share our talents. And when you're worrying about diabetes or, you know, appendix that just burst or whatever the issue is, you can't you can't provide why you're here. You can't focus. And so what I think we're committed to is helping people do their purpose. And I think it's the
Amen.
most important thing we can do.
I echo that 100% because on this show, often I interview spiritual teachers and meditation teachers. I mean, we're very much into the metaphysical realm here. And honestly, that's probably more aligned with my purpose. But talking to people like you, I think, is so important because of the reason you just described. If someone's sick and low in energy,
Right.
they're going to, how do you have energy to go take a meditation course or to be of service or whatever your life purpose happens to be, specifically in terms of your own spiritual growth, personal development. I know as someone who's been very sick on multiple occasions in my life, sometimes for long periods of time, I had no energy left to do anything except just survive,
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
all of the biohacking and all the stuff that I'm always talking about on this podcast, I remind my listeners like this is just the groundwork to get your physical vessel up to speed to do what you're actually here for. So I'm
Right.
fully in agreement with that and on board with that. I appreciate that perspective because it's tempting, I think, for many of us, myself included, to get caught up in the limitations of the body and thinking that if we just get healthy enough and eat right and take the right supplements and get rid of whatever it is that's troubling us, in terms of disease or dysfunction, chronic issues, that then we'll be happy. But the happiness is actually more coming from the way we think, the way we feel, our interpersonal relationships. But you can't get there until you take care of the body. So it's kind of a double-edged sword or a
Abso-
conundrum that we find ourselves in.
Absolutely true. I'm with you,
Yeah,
buddy.
so I appreciate that. Well, man, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
Thank you for going over my labs. That was really illuminating for me. And like I said, hopefully for some other people watching and listening that, are doing similar kind of work and want to make some sense of it. That's really fun. And also, in terms of that part of the conversation, very affirming that the things I'm doing are working. And there's,
well, absolutely.
a couple things here and there to be mindful of. But I would have been really disappointed if we went over that stuff and I was a train wreck after spending the past 25 years devoting my
No,
life to being
no,
healthy in all these ways. So that was a go get 'em for me, like, all right, we're on the right track.
no, you're not a train wreck at all. I think you're in great shape. I think your liver is compromised. That would be my theory. But
Yeah.
there's short of an MRI, I don't know that I could prove it. But the fact that you've got this Marcons hanging out, so I think that's an important area of focus for you. And
Yeah.
and I've even got some thoughts around that which I can share offline. But
Great.
uh, I'm sure you've got a real good approach. But there's several ways to address that, and we can talk about that.
Awesome. Sounds good.